Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. I'm really excited to see folks. My name is Samantha Miller, and I'm going to be the host today for our gathering. I really look forward to exploring the topics of queer ecology with all of you, and especially some of my wonderful coworkers. I want to give a quick shout out to my team that really helped make this webinar happen, and particularly Sydney Anderson, who's going to be helping in the Zoom background today. So to kick things off, I wanted to make sure we're all acquainted with a little bit of Zoom etiquette before we get started. This meeting is an actual meeting instead of a webinar. So we do ask folks that they remain muted and also keep their cameras off to help with the bandwidth for this call. There's a lot of us here, so I'm really excited to see that. And as the presentations go, as we continue with the presentations, if there's any questions that arise, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to be able to submit questions as we continue. So we're going to dive into a lot of great topics today. So I wanted to give everyone a quick overview of our agenda. We are going to be exploring the topics and the foundations of queer ecology with Braley, who is our assistant naturalist here at NWF. They have actually pre-recorded their presentation for today. And we will then hear live from Tatiana Eves and Anita Singh, our other two guest speakers. And I will introduce all three of them in more detail in the next slide. Next, after that in our agenda, we will have time for a Q&A session. So again, reminder to put any of your questions that arise throughout the presentations into the Q&A feature. And we will also end with some closing remarks, and we will focus on highlighting some queer-led organizations that are really focusing on these intersections that we hope that you all can really get engaged with after this call. So now I'm going to briefly introduce our guest speakers. First, I want to introduce Anita Singh, who is a national field educator at NWF that is based out of Detroit and works to manage our Eco Green program. They are also a co-leader of the BIPOC ERG and co-founded the Queer and Trans Birding Detroit organization. Next, I'm pleased to introduce Tatiana Eves, who is the Community Engagement and Campaigns Manager on the National Campaigns team here at NWF. Tatiana is also an interfaith minister, a spiritual herbalist, leads herbal education workshops, and also teaches on environmental and community stewardship. And lastly, I'm going to introduce Braley Hart, who is the assistant naturalist for NWF, and they specialize in creating engaging wildlife conservation content and communications that really ensures that we have scientific accuracy and accessibility across all of the educational materials that we distribute nationwide. Braley has also developed and led numerous workshops that are aimed at fostering inclusivity and engagement in conservation efforts. So, that the National Wildlife Federation stands proudly in solidarity and in celebration of the queer community. We are outspoken about pride in our people, and we acknowledge that we have a responsibility to make sure that outdoor spaces are inclusive and welcoming to all people. So I really encourage folks to check out the Pride in Our People story map. That is a really great primer that kind of goes over the beauty, history, and importance of pride. And we'll be sharing that in the chat. Pride Month is also a really important time to recognize and fight against decades-long prejudice, violence, and discrimination against the queer and trans community. And we do ask folks to check out the 2024 Anti-Trans Bill Tracker to see how these local laws might be affecting the trans and queer community where you live. And we'll also be putting that in the chat. Lastly, violence against transgender and non-conforming people, including children, is also on the rise. And this disproportionately affects trans people of color, particularly Black trans women. And we must work to combat this at every turn that we can. So I wanted to give a few last notes before we dive into our first presentation with Braley. I really wanted to give an overview of the four topics of queer ecology that we're going to focus on today. And the first, topic or pillar is that the diversity of human sexual behavior is also reflected in the animal kingdom. Um, the second pillar would be that queerphobic and heterocentric views of wildlife have unfortunately created this idea that queer people are abnormalities, which we know that's not the truth. The third pillar is that homophobia is still an active barrier and it limits where queer and trans researchers can go here in the US and also abroad. And lastly, we're going to be touching upon how nature is so often a haven for stigmatized people, and therefore we all have a duty to make sure, again, that our outdoor events and educational programming is really safe and accessible for all people. So now we're going to hear more about all of these topics from our first presenter, NWF naturalist Braley Hart. Thanks, everyone.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Braley Hart. I am an evolutionary and behavioral biologist, as well as being the assistant naturalist for the National Wildlife Federation. And I'm here today to give you a brief introduction of queer ecology. Because it may be that you're not even sure what this term means, and that would be no surprise because it's a fairly new idea. You might even be thinking, what is queer ecology? Well, I'm going to answer that question with a few of my own. First question, is a liger a lion or a tiger? Well, like any other hybrid animal, it's neither and both. Doesn't fit into either of those categories, right? Okay, so second question, is a virus a living organism or a non-living entity? A little bit tougher. According to our very narrow definition of what it means to be alive, a virus is a non-living entity. But like all living beings, and unlike anything else, viruses reproduce and evolve. So maybe they deserve their own third category. Last question, is Central Park in New York City a natural space or an unnatural space? Think about it. Because if you've ever been to this park, you might think this is a natural area, and it indeed does harbor naturalized ecosystems, but it is in fact entirely man-made. So is it either or both? The point of these questions is to illustrate an important point. They're simply too complex, too unique to reduce down to one of two categories. And this idea is exactly what the queer fighting against for years. We don't fit something as a box. We need a spectrum. Queer things, it forces us to use an interdisciplinary field.
Samantha, I'm not able to hear you if you're talking, but
I'm not. Getting that my internet is unstable. I apologize, folks. Let me try this one more time.
World so wonderfully unique. Because diversity is out there, human or otherwise, and I have some examples for you. Japanese macaques show that same-sex relationships are a natural part of both long-term bonding and short-term interactions, with females sometimes preferring male partners or female partners, while others take consorts of any sex. Female-female pairs of Laysan albatrosses successfully raise chicks together, and many will not engage with males once in their entire 50 years of life. Some coral gobies undergo multiple complex, complete sex changes in their lives. And clam shrimp have what we might consider to be 3 distinct sexes, a male and 2 variants of a hermaphrodite, one that can self-fertilize and one that mates with other males. It's crazy, right? And these are only 4 examples of the now thousands of species that we know exhibit same-sex behaviors or sex-changing biology. So these sorts of behaviors are anything but unnatural. In fact, current research suggests that indiscriminate mating, or what we might call bisexuality in humans, was likely the first ancestral form of sexual behavior for all animals. And this is because the first evolved animals reproduced asexually by cloning, and at that time there's only one sex. But next, once we see distinct gonads or sperm and egg develop, we have 2 distinct sexes that can mate together. But at this point, there's really been no way to evolve.
Samantha, do you want to try unsharing and then I could try
to recognize male from female. So, with whomever was available and succeeded half of the time. It's not bad odds, actually. It wasn't really until later, after same-sex or sex-specific signals like pheromones evolved to communicate to animals that, hey, I'm a male or hey, I'm a female, that animals could seek out a specific sex. And that's when we would see things like heterosexual preference evolve. This idea really challenges the notion that same-sex behaviors need specific evolutionary explanations. Instead, it proposes that because these behaviors have always existed in the history of animals, and that they persist because they were never sufficiently costly to eliminate, just kind of like your appendix. You don't really need it, but it's still there. And we see sexual diversity in our scientists too, of course, and having such diversity is a proven benefit to the field of science itself. Diverse groups are statistically far more likely to solve problems, more problems, and faster. Inclusivity in science also brings us unique perspectives that challenge assumptions and foster innovation. I want to give you the example of Dr. Karen Workington, a biology professor and a professor of women's gender and sexuality studies. Their groundbreaking research on red-eyed tree frogs illustrates that queer perspectives can lead to significant scientific discoveries, because this person discovered that red-eyed tree frog eggs can hatch early to evade predators. This is a hypothesis that seems kind of simple, but it's one that surprisingly had never been considered before. And Dr. Workington attributes this discovery to their queer perspective, which conditioned them to expect that generally accepted normal things aren't always correct. They believed that their colleagues, who might have had a more traditional worldview, lacked the appreciation for the extent of possibilities to even see that this could be something that is real. And by the way, if you want to know what that looks like, here are some of those tadpoles escaping. Interestingly, an informal survey of 40 people on the 500 Queer Scientists website who identify themselves as animal behaviorists or behavioral ecologists revealed that nearly half of them specialize in what could be considered socially othered organisms, These include animals such as skunks and spiders, wasps, parasites, sharks, all these animals that often carry a negative or fearful sentiment in popular culture. And unfortunately, as a general rule, these otherized creatures typically receive less scientific attention. They have a data deficiency. So this suggests that queer biologists might be more likely to study the poorly researched organisms that, like them, have been outcast in some way and desperately need some scientific attention. Despite this progress, though, queer field biologists still face significant challenges. Safety concerns, biases, and logistical issues can hinder their work. For example, this map shows where homosexual activity is punishable by force or even death. I personally know scientists who have had to lead a double life when they work in the field in Africa, or have even been run out of their research sites by threat of execution. And I want you to really think about that. Have you ever considered what we aren't learning from these areas, what we don't know about the world, simply because the scientists who want to study it love the wrong person? This isn't only an international problem, by the way. Research by queer scientists is often hindered by the need to work with landowners and stakeholders right here in the US who wish them harm. So let me reiterate. Inclusive science is better science. Inclusive in terms of sexual behavior of animals, and inclusive in terms of allowing people with varied sexual lives to do science. Moving forward, it's crucial to support diversity in perspectives in scientific field research, and that's not only to enrich the lives of the scientists, but also to promote a more comprehensive and frankly a more accurate view of the world. By addressing and overcoming these challenges, we can foster a more inclusive and a more innovative scientific community. I want to thank you all for allowing me to speak. I apologize that I can't be there in person to answer any questions, but if you would like to speak to me, please feel free to contact me either on email or on Instagram, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the session.
Wonderful. I am just going to reshare my screen again, starting from that, and then we'll continue our presentation. Alrighty. So I really hope that folks were able to learn something new from Braylee's presentation. And we invite you all to continue learning about this topic by checking out our Queer Ecology blog series, which Sydney will share in the chat, as well as our blog highlighting young lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer leaders in conservation. Next, we are going to hear from Tatiana Eves about how to explore queer ecology in our own lives.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Sam. And thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. So yeah, I want to talk about queer ecology from the perspective of like our everyday lives and how we move in the world, like as queer people and as people who don't necessarily identify as queer. So next slide, please. So as Braylee already illustrated, nature knows no heterosexual or gender binaries, and the natural world often breaks binaries that are imposed by societal standards. So in the natural world, diversity thrives without the constraints of labels or categories. Yet as humans, we have a tendency to fear the unknown and to seek comfort in binary thinking. We often simplify the world into good and bad and right and wrong to avoid these complexities and the nuances that truly define our human experience. And I also want to say that in all of my slides, like the pictures are very intentional. And so this is a banana slug, which has male and female genitalia. So yeah, next slide. So I want us to imagine if a behavior that we didn't like wasn't inherently bad or good, right? Like what if this behavior simply was, and we just allowed ourselves to sit with it in the present moment without rushing to label or judge it, right? Like embracing such ambiguity really requires us to look within and engage in a deeper level of self-reflection, because often what we're in aversion to or find uncomfortable reflect aspects of ourselves that we struggle to accept or to love. And our modern society at large really has largely lost its capacity to sit with discomfort. Yet discomfort is such a powerful teacher, and it invites us to explore our inner selves more profoundly rather than pointing the finger outward. Next slide, please. So queer people by necessity live in these gray areas, these ambiguous places that aren't existing within these, binary, right, wrong, good, bad, right? And navigate the unknown almost regularly. They exhibit a unique courage in that way that comes from standing up for their right to exist and be seen in a world that often demands conformity. Right, so having queer people in various spaces, like Braylee illustrated earlier, is incredibly crucial for a more expansive perspective, because queer people are often challenging the status quo and providing those invaluable insights, not only in a more general and broad sense in whatever field or work that they do, but also in like the inherent way of life, like into living authentically and embracing diversity of thought. And so having queer individuals in spaces brings so many different experiences and viewpoints, right? Everyone is an individual and has their own individual perspective and views that they've developed and like experiences they've learned from in their life. And so this fosters a deeper understanding of human diversity and the ways in which we experience life differently. And this inclusion helps create the environments where everyone feels free, regardless of their identity, to feel accepted and understood. And also the flower in this picture is a wild violet, and they're self-pollinating. If you look at a wild violet, under the soil, they have these like little white flowers, and like those are the self-pollinating parts. So if you have violets and you didn't know that, check for their little flowers under the soil. All right, next slide. So by diving into these gray areas, like queer ecology embodies this idea that nature mirrors our own human experience. By observing nature, we can learn more about ourselves and our interconnectedness with the world. To remember that we are not isolated beings, but we're part of an intricate web of life. And to truly understand this, we have to take that time to pause, observe, and reflect deeply. And by diving into these like murkier gray areas and asking ourselves these challenging questions, it helps us understand the world, ourselves, and each other more deeply, and helps us to realize how much more alike we are than different, and break down those artificial barriers that divide us. And so many people go through life without questioning these things, without questioning their gender or, and like the cultural or familiar expectations placed upon them, right? Following these societal rules about who they should be attracted to, when they should marry, have children, where to live, study, or work. So therefore, even those of us who do not identify as queer, like we can also, like everyone can also benefit from questioning these norms, right? Sexuality and gender exist on a spectrum, and by delving deeper and exploring our true selves beyond what has been dictated to us, we can uncover our authentic identities and live our most fulfilling lives. Next slide, please. So queer people navigate these gray areas, not because it's easy, right, but because it's necessary for our survival. Like living inauthentically can feel like a death sentence. And there's such a debt of gratitude to those who have fought for the freedoms that we have today and to those who are still unable to express themselves freely and safely, you know, and by embracing what society deems as taboo, queer people can live just much more honestly and freely, often with that deeper level of self-awareness that comes from doing that work. And like I was saying, you don't necessarily have to identify as queer to live a more queer life, right? Just doing your work to embrace change, the unknown, and create a world where everyone can be themselves without judgment or labels, right? Knowing your individual sphere of influence. And that being an ally means like diving into these waters, right? Accepting that understanding is not a prerequisite for acceptance and loving deeply without constraints. And an understanding of queer ecology not only enriches our lives, but it also helps us all to embrace the beautiful complexity of human existence and seeing beyond binaries so that we can each have a more honest relationship with life as a whole. Next slide, please. And that's all I have for you all. So thank you so much for your time and your openness and the space here. Again, I'm Tatiana Eves, and yeah, feel free to email me with any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tatiana. I wish I had time to like really go in my journal after that. That was really beautiful. Next up, we're going to hear from Anita Singh, who's going to be talking about building relationship and community.
Great, thank you, Samantha, and thanks, Tatiana, for sharing all that. I just really appreciate your energy and ways of being and the way that you ask us to inquiry into our lives. So yeah, as you've seen, we've kind of gone from like the science to some of the inquiry, some of the deep diving, and today I'm just going to share a little bit about in practice what I do around queer ecology. You know, for me as a queer person, a gender nonconforming person, it's really a gift. And in some of the ways that, you know, Tatiana was also sharing is that we really get to create our own worlds in this way that has not been like prescribed for us, which is generally a blessing. And just kind of looking through the world through that lens and through that mindset actually allows us to expand our thinking, expand our consciousness, expand what's actually possible for the future, to dream new worlds, to do all of that. There's really just infinite possibilities. And that's just one of the many blessings, I think, that comes with being a queer person. I did want to start out by saying that in my culture, historically, there has been, you know, a really large acceptance of being trans, of being queer, what we would call now. There historically was no differentiation between clothing, between makeup in genders. And I'm talking specifically about what is now known as India, the Indus Valley. And that a lot of these lenses that are placed upon the global south, you will have seen that map that Braley presented to us. That's actually all colonial exports. Historically, our cultures have been very, very diverse, have been very accepting, and have included a wide possibility of being. And one of the reasons why queerness and transness is historically so policed is because it's easier to control us if we just fit into two categories. It really shrinks down our thinking, it shrinks down our possibilities and our potential of where we can go and who we can be. So I did want to mention that because, you know, Africa is a huge continent and it's very across country, and a lot of this stuff is colonial. And that being said, we can switch to the next slide, Sam. My formatting is not as pretty as Tatiana, but here we go, some photos. What was I gonna say? Oh yeah. So queer ecology is actually just ecology. Queerness exists in the world. You know, Western science is just starting to catch up, is just starting to find out that all of these different creatures have so many genders. You know, fungi have 23,000 genders. My background here is flamingos. Flamingos are polyamorous, they're queer. You know, every single creature, every single living being has a wide spectrum of being when it comes to gender, sexuality. So queer ecology is really just ecology, and we have a lot to learn from the people who have known this for generation and for millennia. And here you'll see just a couple of the things that I've been up to. I co-founded an organization called Queer and Trans Birding in Detroit, Waiwiatanong, the native name for this place, because I personally was not finding the spaces that I wanted to be in to explore and go on adventures in nature and to connect with folks. I will say that the landscape has really changed a lot in the last 2 years, and especially after the pandemic. But one of the driving forces behind creating Queer and Trans Birding was just not feeling like I was able to be my full self in outdoor and nature spaces. And so last year, my friend Jack and I started just organizing, and I've been able to collaborate with a lot of different folks and organizations just in one short year. We have been able to put on, you'll see here, there's the picture in the top left is a vernal pool study. There were a ton of queer and trans folks on this event, and we got to sample a vernal pool in Rouge Park in Detroit. And one of the things that I love too is very intergenerational, the work that I am a part of here in Detroit as well. And the queer and trans birding has expanded beyond just birding. We've done birding, but we've actually found that people are really craving these events. Our birding events have gotten 75 people coming to them. And of course, when you get 75 people coming to an event, you're not going to see so many birds. Turns more into like a queer ecology, a queer hike through the woods, looking at plants, you know, so it's kind of expanded beyond that. And it just goes to show that like there's such a need and a desire to connect in outdoor spaces in this way. We can go to the next one, Sam. Yeah, so some of the things that we've been able to do is we put on Queer Ecology hike recently that got to look at some native bee species, solitary bees. And one of the things that I hope that you'll see that are depicted in these photos is really just the joy, the excitement, the enthusiasm, the passion that people come out when they can really be themselves, to connect and to enjoy each other's company, look at some birds, look at some plants, look at some insects. We've done queer bug walks as well. We're doing a kayak paddle this coming weekend. That's also going to include some birding and just some, you know, plant ID and things like that as well. So yeah, that's one of the reasons I started this. And just by building in community in this way, it's really expanded my perspective too. Like I've just learned so much from my community. I have come to have a new appreciation for insects because I've been working closely with my friend from the Xerces Society on some of these events. And it really just brings to light a new way of looking at things, kind of how Tatiana was saying. Like, I never noticed insects in that way before as I do now. And so it's really helped me kind of grow and expand those possibilities. Honestly, it's been such a joy. I don't know, is there one more slide, Sam? We can flip to that one.
Just your like concluding slide.
Oh, my conclusion slide. Okay. Yeah, it's just been really a joy and a passion of mine to be able to host these events and plan them with my friends and my colleagues, and really to create and to build that space where we all feel that we can show up like our full selves, bringing our unique perspectives into these spaces and the outdoors and continue to connect and build that community. So just I really appreciate you giving us this opportunity, Sam, your team, Sydney. So thank you so much. If you want to reach out, there's a Queer and Trans Birding Detroit Instagram, and you can also reach me by email. So thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Anita. I'm like super appreciative of Braley, Tatiana, Anita for their time and just sharing these insights with all of us. And I'm really excited to dive into the question and answer portion of our session today. So I will stop my share for now, and folks can feel comfortable to type out your questions in the Q&A chat box, and then we will flag them for our presenters. So it looks like we have one question. Wonderful question from Tess. And this maybe we'll start with Anita, since you're top on the screen here, and then Tatiana can go next. But the question we have from Tess is, what do you love about being part of the queer community in conservation spaces and in general?
Yeah, I think I spoke to this a little bit in my presentation, just how much of a joy it is to spend time with folks who either identify as such or are allied with us, because it really does expand your possibilities of connecting and building relationship with land, with nature, with each other, when we gather in these spaces, because we bring such a unique perspective and lens to seeing the world. And so for me, it just really allows me to be my full self and to think of all the possibilities, you know, that can exist as we, because as we all know, conservation started as really a terrible kind of industry. And so this to me feels like a way of reconnecting with the land and each other in a way that feels like we're doing that in good relationship with each other.
Tatiana, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think I would agree. I just like my favorite part about being queer and like being in queer spaces is that like the depth of like conversation. Like I'm someone who really loves like deep conversations, like let's talk about the world, let's talk about what we want to see, you know. And I just find that I'm always like learning so much in those spaces and just able to like connect much deeper on like, you know, what are my values and like how they're shared with other people, and like just like the beautiful ways that people are just like moving in the world and thinking about things differently. And just like that diversity of just like thought and opinion and ideas. And I think that that's always just like super fun. Like I feel like the capacity to dream I've found is like very high in like queer spaces, because we like to just like bend a lot of the rules and like see how we can create something new. So yeah,
definitely feeling like safety is really going to be able to foster like a lot more acceptance of ourselves and the people around us. So it can definitely lead to deeper relationships. So I appreciate both of that, both of your answers. So we have a few more questions, but I think I want to answer this one next, which is just asking, how can folks be better allies when planning events? Are there any tips on making events more welcoming to the lesbian, gay, trans, or queer community in general? And maybe Anita, do you have any like tips to kick that off? Or ideas?
Yeah, I would say, you know, I always start with, let's not reinvent the wheel. There's folks out here doing this work, probably organizing in some capacity around outdoor events and LGBTQ people. So connect with those folks, learn from them. Just start out showing up and being a part of that community in some type of way, before asking folks to just like join in and be a part of what you're putting on. The other piece is that a little bit of self-education too, of just knowledge of how to address people, basically, you know, pronouns, gender, stuff like that. And then having humility, right? Because we're all going to mess up. I still mess up people's pronouns, you know, so it's okay. And like, let's have some humility around that and just apologize and move forward. So just a few things that come off the top of my head.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit to that. Like I want to say, yeah, like 100% everything that Anita just shared. And another thing I want to add is like intentionality is really important. So like, what is your reason for wanting to bring people in? And being really clear and transparent about that. And like, one, knowing it yourself, and then like two, being transparent and like connecting with groups and people that do this work so that, you know, everyone knows what to expect. And yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, so we have one more question. What would you like to see next for queer folks in conservation and environmental spaces? Like if you could dream as big as you want of like what you could build for yourself or just the community in general, what would you like to see? And maybe Tatiana, do you want to take this one first to give?
Sure. Yeah. I would just like to see queer people everywhere in like all of the spaces and feeling safe to be in like that full expression of whatever their queerness means for them. Because when people feel safe to be in their full expansion and they're like safety is like very, very foundational. And once you have that need met, then there's just so much that can be built and can be dreamt. And like in terms of like what Braley was sharing about like contributions to conservation science spaces, and like, you know, there has to be a certain level of safety for you to get creative, right? That's true for anyone. And for you to be able to dream and really just like come up with these new ideas, there has to be a level of feeling safe. And so my dream is that we all remember our interconnectedness with not only each other as humans, but like the entire world, right? And that every person's wellness and safety is connected to ours, and that it is also our job to ensure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anita, do you want to share anything to that question, or should we move on to another question?
Yeah, echoing all of that, I think just the ways in which I see the work that I'm doing and queer and trans folk really building relationship with land, especially here in Detroit, and each other, is something that I think we could do a lot more of in all of the spaces to really be connected to land and to each other. So yeah, and just echoing everything also that you said, Tatiana.
Wonderful. So we have like 2 more questions. Folks definitely feel comfortable to add more questions as things are coming up. We have a good solid couple of more minutes to dive into things. But I have one question here that is from someone who's in our affiliate community. And this is, any advice on how to help affiliate leaders embrace queer culture and ecology especially from a more conservative states and space. So thinking about, maybe in the organizational way, like how can we build power and movement to support folks? And anyone who has thoughts can chime in there.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. And I think it has a lot to do with what I was sharing in my presentation, that it starts at the individual level, and also like just being a leader in that space, right? And being able to sit with those gray areas and not have to label things in a binary way, right? As like good or bad, right or wrong. Like even in terms of like assumptions about other people and like what they have space for or the capacity to understand. I think just moving in a way that defines queer ecology as just ecology and as just like the nature of existing, and creating more spaces for deeper conversations about like any resistance that people have to like certain conversations, right? And like just creating that space where people can talk about their discomforts, sit more with their discomforts and like engage in like constructive dialogue, will be really, really helpful for knowing what is the right fit for like your particular organization or like your particular like group of people, because there are going to be different things that make people feel uncomfortable, right? Like the unknown is scary. We want to, not have to deal with things that we don't understand. But we build that capacity to sit with discomfort over time. And as conservation leaders, right, we have like an obligation to uphold that ourselves and to create that space for others.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And I think like you can only meet people where you've met yourself, right? So like being able to take ownership of how you can show up in different spaces is really important. Anita, did you have any thoughts on that for like affiliate partnerships or just like general partnerships in general?
Yeah, I noticed that it was especially in more conservative states the question was asked. So queer and trans people are everywhere. So I would just consider connecting with folks who are from those communities to see, what they're already doing. I know, for example, like Oklahoma has some of the most intense like trans bans happening. It's also one of the states that has the highest indigenous population. So I also want to just recognize that some of the states that are facing this often have the highest populations of Black and Brown people and are, facing severe like oppression and marginalization for that reason. And it's oftentimes a testing ground to bring it to other quote unquote non-progressive states. So just wanted to acknowledge that and to recognize that queer and trans people are everywhere and deserve our respect across the board, not just because they're located in the north or on the coast. So that's really important, and to connect with those communities.
Wonderful. Okay, so I have another good question, which is, what's your favorite queer critter or organism? If you have one off the top of your head.
Maybe you can go first.
I mean, I really love birds. Like, I don't know if it's apparent, but birds to me are just so queer because they're just so flamboyant and just out here, with their dances, with their ways of being, with their dress. They're oftentimes like my style icons. So I don't know if I have a particular bird, but I had the blessing to see a quetzal this spring, and my God, that was just like life-changing experience. So talk about flamboyance and really truly being who you are. Yeah, birds teach me a lot of lessons.
Beautiful. What about you, Tatiana?
First, I want to say that that's like the coolest thing ever, Anita. And like, I feel like I hope that in my life I get to see one. They're such sacred birds. Um, so my favorite is the plant that I had in one of my slides, which is wild violet. Like, it's just so magical. Like, as an herbalist, like, I love plants. And wild violet is one of those that, you know, she grows everywhere and like is so known for these like beautiful purple showy flowers that are like super delicate, and then has this like secondary flower that people don't know about that grows underground, is completely white, and like that's the self-pollinating one. So like having like both of these parts, you know, is just like super super beautiful. And yeah, they're just really really cool. Like, if you should go home and look in the soil under the violet. Like, it's really cool.
Mm. Okay, so we have a few more questions. I'm going to get to one question just quickly because we, at the end of the presentation, I actually have a list of a few organizations that are focused on creating community for queer folks that are interested in the environment. So those, I will share those in a minute. But to get to, we have two more questions. So one question here is, after hosting a lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer art show, we were accused of being too political. Do you have any advice on how to address the argument that, you know, supporting queer people is a political choice? Any thoughts on that?
That sucks. I'm sorry that that happened to you. I mean, it's a political choice to say that hosting an event for LGBTQ people is a political choice. So that's, I don't know that you're going to sway people who are maybe, you know, set in that way. But building power and building community with people who are allied and aligned with that to really make sure that you have the support that you need to put on things like that. I would suggest going that direction, and you know, when you really have numbers and support from different orgs, can really sway and change people's minds, you know, over the course of time too. So slow movement kind of political power building work.
Yeah, and I would also add that word choice is really important, right? Like, it's important in being an ally to be really clear and intentional about word choice. And like, when we have the power to push back against these narratives, to do so. And so in a particular case where someone comes in, you know, an organization or whoever it was, to say that this is a political choice, like having that language of why it is not a political choice, and the work that, you know, you're committed to do to support all people and make sure that like everyone has a clean, healthy, safe environment to live in, right? Like, being able to have that language to fall back on is going to be really, really powerful for that pushback, and making sure to like tie it back to like the intent of like the work, the art show, right? And yeah, just languaging is really important.
Well, thank you both so much for, you know, spending time with us and answering some of these questions. I want to quickly transition to wrap up our call today. Let me share the correct screen for folks. 1 second. So I just want to end with sharing some organizations that you should know about for Pride Month. So we have a couple of organizations that host events in their local areas. So I've listed them here, and we'll also send an email following up. So hopefully folks are, you know, in vicinity to some of these communities and can participate. And yeah, with that being said, thank you to everyone for coming and just sharing space with us and being open to really, yeah, opening up your hearts and your minds to this conversation. And I just really appreciate it. So with that, we will conclude for today. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.